Welcome to The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky, a weekly podcast that breaks down politics, policy, and current affairs. I'm Becky Scherr.
And I'm Michael Brodkorb.
We are back with a live episode to break down all things surrounding last night's presidential debate between former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. 10 episodes ago was a recap of the first presidential debate, then between Trump and President Joe Biden. And wow, have things changed in a short period of time. We are joined by two of our regulars, Preya Samsundar and Will Davis, to dive deep into last night's debate, and there certainly is a lot to discuss. As a reminder, Will is a political consultant with ARC Initiatives and previously served as research director for the Minnesota DFL. Preya has worked for the MNGOP, the RNC, and various campaigns of all levels. We will kick things off by discussing how each of us believe the candidates performed overall. We will hit on the format of the debate, the moderator's performance, and time spent on the attack and on the issues. We will break down some standout moments and missed opportunities and some key policy stances that were articulated. And then we will get into what we have seen since the debate and what we can anticipate moving forward. Thanks for joining us and enjoy the show. I want to start by thanking our two guests for joining us once again. We are looking forward to a lively debate about the debate, and I know you will not disappoint. But before we get into it, Michael and I wanted to make sure we were taking a moment to acknowledge that today is September 11th. 23 years ago, our nation faced a devastating terrorist attack. Thousands of innocent Americans lost their lives. Our brave and heroic first responders rushed into danger, sacrificing everything to save others. Today and every day, we must remember and never forget. Now, it's always... Oh, go ahead, Michael.
No, go ahead. Great job.
It's always odd to transition into a fiery conversation after a somber moment, but I appreciate you guys taking the time to be with us and acknowledge that, of course, this really important today, and we are going to do our best to make the transition as smooth as possible here. So
I was planning on recording this episode with my Darth Vader mask to honor the passing of James Earl Jones, but I didn't want to do it on September 11th. And I also couldn't get the audio to work.
Well, it would have been an interesting sight to see.
Yeah,
maybe you keep working on it, and we'll see if we can work it another day.
Yeah. I'm going to keep working on it, trust me. All right, sorry.
We are certainly going to get into some specifics about the candidates' answers and their policy positions. But I want to start by simply going around the horn here and getting everyone's takeaway on how each of the candidates performed individually. So let's start with Vice President Kamala Harris' performance. Before we get to the fan club, Preya, I'd like to start with you and kind of just get a little takeaway of how you thought the Vice President performed last night.
Honestly, Honestly, it's one of those things where you kind of just have to sit back and look at it holistically. I think right at the very beginning, you could tell she was very nervous. Her voice was kind of shaky. She wasn't really in her comfort zone. Folks love to talk about how Kamala is very much a prepper. She didn't seem confident in her opening and closing. That was very evident, like right off the bat. You could tell she was most comfortable in areas where Democrats do well: abortion, more of these social issues that they tend to be, bigger champions on. Those were the areas that she did well. But I think expectations were set very high last night for Kamala Harris. She's been in this race now for, I think, 50 days, is what it's been since Joe Biden stepped out of the presidential contest. And she's done one interview. And so I think a lot of people were expecting a lot last night in terms of what they would hear, how she would perform, and I don't think that she delivered. I think that she was able to stay on message, that she was able to get her talking points across. But I think when it came down to substance, when it came down to actual issues, she didn't hit the mark that she needed to. In a lot of ways, this is the first time that many of these voters would see Kamala Harris for who she really is. To Donald Trump's point last night, and a point that many Republicans have made in the last 50 days, Kamala Harris was not elected by Democrat voters to be the presidential candidate. What we have witnessed in the last 2 months is historic. And so the fact that she did become the nominee without going through the process of Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, so on and so forth to get these delegates. It's not the same thing as, what Joe Biden did to get to where he was, whether you thought he was, mentally capable or not. And so I think that she really missed the mark on that front. She spent more time trying to bait Donald Trump than she did talking about her own issues. And so I think it creates an opportunity still for the Trump campaign to define her, since she did not define herself last night. So I'll give her props for baiting Donald Trump. She did what she was supposed to. She managed to get her talking points across. But I think overall she did not come across as confident as she should be, where she needed to. And at a point where this was really her opening salvo to the American people to talk about the issues and talk about why they should trust her to be their candidate when they didn't have the opportunity to vote for her or go through the process that we do with every single presidential candidate before this moment. She failed.
Will, you have donned your Harris Walls hat there very appropriately. So you probably are among 63% of debate watchers who, according to the CNN Flash poll, said Harris had a better performance. Talk to us about your takeaways there.
Yeah, I mean, you don't go into a debate prepped with a bunch of technocratic numbers, right? You don't go in ready to debate policy with Donald Trump. You go in ready to get personal. You go in ready to withstand the attacks that he's going to level on you, whether it be your appearance or your associations or your father's job or whatever it is, or what people are eating on a regular basis. It's those kind of things. And so I think she came out of it looking very good, in my opinion. I mean, she was composed and she was standing up straight. She had great posture. He was all hunched over and jowly and scowling the whole time. And I thought she handled all of it really well. I mean, I agree. When she came out, she was a little shaky at the very beginning. She was obviously nervous. I get nervous my first at bat at a beer league softball league, though. You know what I mean? It's a lot of pressure. The entire world was watching last night. So I don't know. I think she could be forgiven for being a little nervous about that. And I thought she did great after that. She was delivering her lines, and bait Donald Trump. The guy's a rageaholic. Why wouldn't you do that? That's what I have been doing too, and that's what I would have coached her to do. I thought the policy stuff is going to come. I didn't expect a whole lot of policy on this. I didn't expect a whole lot of policy in this entire election at this point, right? I mean, you have a general idea of where people stand, and she did lay out some of that. But I think in a race against Donald Trump, you do not go in with a knife fight. You don't go into a gunfight with a knife, right? You go in loaded to bear and know you're going to have a vicious fight on your hands. So,
Michael, you've been around debate prep, candidate coaching a lot over the last kind of a couple decades here. What was your takeaway from how Vice President Harris performed?
Well, first of all, I want to say at the onset, as a lot of people know, I want to make sure our listeners know I've endorsed Harris and Walz as a Republican. So I want to say that at the onset, I thought she hit it out of the park. I thought it was a strong performance. Let's just set the table on a couple of things. This was her first time meeting Donald Trump, and this was her first general election debate as the candidate. And Donald Trump has debated 7 other times. He has debated, participated in more presidential debates than any other presidential candidate in terms of the substance. And so he has done this 7 more times. I think she, as Will and Preya both noted, I think she started a little soft, but boy, she got into her groove, and I think she just absolutely hit it out of the park. I thought it was a masterclass in just poking, stepping back, allowing some back and forth, defining your opponent, getting them off message, and delivering on her message. I have literally would say to you that aside from the first kind of few minutes where she was just kind of getting kind of stable and getting out there and just kind of getting her bearings fit, I thought she did an absolutely great job. Just one little side note, and we can talk about it later, more about it later, but I was with a group of, less than 10 Republicans last night for part of the night, and some people that I've identified as potentially voting and becoming more of a Republican Paris. All of them were converted last night. based on her performance and what we saw with Donald Trump. So I think my analysis, and I disclosed my bias at the beginning, but there was also some other people that I were with last night, and overall, I thought she just hit it out of the park.
For my take, I am one of the somewhere between 10 and 20% of undecided voters here that still is yet to figure out what I'm going to do and how I'm going to cast my ballot. I have a lot of troubles with the policy stances of the Harris-Walz campaign, but we did hear a little bit more from her, and we'll get into that a little bit more later on. So starting out, agreeing with everybody, she was certainly nervous. And like you said, understandably, first of all, it's bonkers to me that this is their first time meeting in general. And so that, like, you're meeting not only a former president, you're meeting Donald Trump. I mean, that on top of this debate being a pivotal moment in our country and in your campaign I just don't even know how people deal with that. I absolutely can't fathom. I didn't love her facial reactions at first. There was a lot of head shaking and kind of some little smirks that I didn't think were suiting her well. I think she toned those down a little bit later. I think they worked a little bit better later. The front end bothered me a little bit. And I do think her first answer was, I would say, probably in her worst two answers. I think she didn't answer it, and it really made me a little nervous for how her performance was going to go. One thing that I thought was striking was her eye contact, both directing at Donald Trump when she was speaking about some very pivotal moments. Again, we'll get into some more of that later. But she also spoke directly to the camera and to the voters, which I think is something that worked really well for her and showed that she was trying to connect and relate to voters, whereas Donald Trump, I think, spoke a little bit more directly to the moderators. So with that, I want to hear how everybody thought Donald Trump did. And again, let's I know that we've got some Trump fans, some non-Trump fans, but just general overview of how you thought the former president performed last night, and maybe even how it relates to some of his previous campaign or debate performances as we've seen. Will, I'll start with you on this one.
I thought he came off and like he came off as more flustered than I've ever seen him. I think starting with walking out on stage, walking right up to him and shaking his hand. Has that ever happened to Trump during any of these debates? I don't think so. I have a strong memory of him kind of stalking Hillary Clinton around the stage a little bit. And I remember thinking, well, she was taking the high road, I think was the idea, to look presidential next to this Donald Trump. And I think she kind of ignored him back then. And I think a lot of his opponents have largely ignored his presence, but he's worth acknowledging when he's out there. And she walked right up to him, looked him in the eye. And I think it almost felt like it tripped him up a little bit. And he got off to a fine start. He always does. But I think he was a little taken aback by her just not being afraid of him, not being afraid of his little barbs and jabs. And then on top of that, I think he had about 5 lines that he was delivering over and over and over again, no matter what the question was. Millions and millions pouring, that one. He tried to fit that in everywhere. The abortion question, I know we're going to talk individually, but he was so out of his element. That was his worst part of the entire debate. I think that can't be denied. How he didn't know how to answer that question is beyond me. I think he, I know it's going to come up later, but he obviously was not telling the truth for a lot of it. And I think the difference is he doesn't tell the truth in a grand fashion, just like everything he does. He says lies, and he says them very largely and noticeable, and you cannot help but be like, wow, that was just an absurd statement. There's no nuance there. And that's just kind of how he does it. Everything he says is, it's the biggest, it's the smallest, it's the strongest, it's the weakest, it's the worst, it's the best. And it's just an old shtick. And I think it just didn't hit last night, because I think she was tough and ready to go toe to toe with him on all of it.
Preya, you've been up close and personal with a lot of these debates and with Trump and other candidates. How did you think that the former president performed last night?
So First off, I'm going to start off by saying, and I know we will get into this discussion later, but if we're going to acknowledge Trump's lies, like we better acknowledge Kamala's like lies and mistruths and sidesteps and everything else. And it also didn't help the fact that there was only one. Donald Trump was going against 3 moderators, not just one-on-one with Kamala Harris. And again, we can discuss that later. I think ABC did themselves a huge disservice. But despite the fact, I will admit, this was not his strongest debate. When you look at everything cumulatively, from 2016 on, this was not his strongest debate. And, whether you want to blame it on Kamala Harris, I don't really think that was it. I frankly think that Hillary Clinton was a much more formidable opponent when it comes to debates than Kamala Harris. Whether you want to blame it on that, whether you want to blame it on the fact that he had Laura Loomer sitting on a plane with him hours before he actually jumped on the debate stage, filling his head with God knows what, like, whatever you want to blame it on, it was not his strong suit. We've talked about, Donald Trump not being able to stay on message. We've seen it throughout his rallies, right? Like, again, Becky, you've noted it. I worked to get the man reelected in 2020. I've staffed over a dozen of his rallies. I know what these look like. He has a teleprompter, he has a speech all written out, and he goes off the cuff. You'll see this teleprompter, it's stagnant for 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes because he'll go off on a tangent. We know this about him. It's one of the things that people love about him because he seems authentic, he seems real, he seems relatable. Because he talks and goes off on tangents like normal, regular people would expect. He's not super polished like a traditional politician that we're used to seeing, but it also works to his detriment as well. And last night it was not a helpful helpful. It was a hindrance. I think when you look at this debate, frankly, I think both of them did terribly. I think the losers in last night's debate were the American people. I don't think anybody won. But I think when you look at what this debate was really about, it was not about substance, or even though I think a lot of folks would have liked to see that, and frankly, I would have liked to see a little bit more of that from Kamala last night. It's not about as much of that reality and that substance that we're looking for. It's about the perception of what people feel. It's about the perception of how people feel at home, how they feel when they're going about their everyday life. It's about that perception of how folks feel at home. You heard of these, debate moderators trying to say, well, now, violent crime's going down, or, fact checking Trump on a various number of issues. And that's great, right? Like, we see the numbers from an economic standpoint that the economy is, shifting back to normal, right? But the reality is the perception does not match those numbers. There are Americans right now who do not feel like the economy is getting better. They do not feel like crime is getting better and their communities are safer. They do not feel like the border crisis has been handled. They feel like all of these things are getting worse. And whether or not you agree with Donald Trump on those facts or not, whether you agree with Kamala Harris or not, the fact is that there is a perception of how these things are being viewed. I think regardless of how Trump delivered his message last night, and it was very scattered, it was kind of all over the place. And to Becky's point, he wasn't talking to the American people. He was having a fight with the moderators. Again, whole nother topic we can discuss later. He was still touching on those touch points that are infuriating Americans and are causes for concern for voters right now that Kamala continues to ignore and continues to sidestep. And so I think on that piece of it, on touching on the perception side of things, Trump did well. But on the overall debate and presentation of it all, it was not a good night for him.
Michael, not a fan of Donald Trump over the years. How do you think he did last night?
Well, we've done a lot of episodes talking about debates, debate prep, and other types of things. I think this was Donald Trump's worst performance in a debate, and I was surprised because my expectation coming in was he's done this 7 times. He's very tough to it's tough to moderate and control Trump in a debate, even though he agrees to abide by rules and other issues. And so I think he was completely off his game. And I think a couple of reasons. I think, and Becky, we've talked about this before. I think that the fact that he's running against the vice president, Kamala Harris, frustrates him and angers him. I think there is an issue that he has with her being a Black woman is challenging to him. And I think the way that she came out on stage, shook his hand, kind of controlled the environment. Even with her slow start, Trump did not dominate, I think, at any point. And I think, let me just say a couple of things. This is the challenge with Trump. He has an inability to stay on message, which we've talked about before at length, and some with members of this current panel that we have right now. If you were a part of Donald Trump's debate prep for last night, you did a bad job. And if it's the debate prep, the physical debate prep, meaning in the rooms going back and forth with the questions, I have to say to you, having Laura Loomer on the plane is not a way in which to walk into a debate, because we'll get into some of those subjects later. There was some real craziness that came out of the former president's mouth last night. And I don't think if you're doing an analysis of the debate prep, anyone's going to say that Laura Loomer was helpful to it. Lindsey Graham, United States Senator from South Carolina, called the debate performance a disaster. And so I think universally, Donald Trump there's not many people aside from some online polls that his supporters have ginned up or in the minds of Donald Trump, and he thinks he did a good job. How bad of a job he did is that he went to the spin room. That's how bad of a job he did, that he felt the need to go from the debate stage to the spin room to do cleanup on the mistakes that he made in the aisle, because there was a lot of mess that he needed to clean up. And it's pretty unusual to see candidates go into the spin room when they've just commanded the stage for over 90 minutes and had a direct channel to the audience or to the cameras. So the fact that he felt the need to go there and do cleanup is a validation, I think, to something he would never admit, but that he had a terrible performance. And I think the polls last night, if you look at what expectations were of people coming in and what their reaction was, the numbers are universal in incredible polls done by reputable organizations that the vice president won the debate. And I think the only question I think that remains is, will there be a second one? Because I think her performance was so strong. His was so abysmal. That's a discussion we can have further, but overall, I think it was just a disastrous performance.
I don't have a ton to add here. I tend to agree. I think the first 30 minutes or so, his appearance at least, he looked a little bit more reserved. He had, his grumpy face that he always has, but he was a little more stoic. After that, he was definitely taking the bait that she was slinging out there. He was smirking, he was shaking his head, he was making that kind of like WTF face that he makes. And he was getting more and more fired up in his responses. He definitely, it's something we haven't seen. It's something we've kind of expected and wondered about over the last couple of debates. We certainly talked about it ahead of the last Biden debate, that he was going to call him a loser and all of these different things that we were anticipating that Biden was going to use against Trump to get under his skin. That was not successful last time. Kamala Harris not only put that bait out there, but he took it every time, and it just got worse and worse as he went. At one point, Harris had said the line, "He's more interested in defending himself than looking out for you," and I kind of think his response or his performance last night proved that, because so many times he took his opportunity to answer a significant policy question, and some of them that he should have hit out of the park. Immigration, we'll chat about more when we get to issues here. And he couldn't help himself but defend his rally size or people leaving early. And it was really to his detriment that he was not able to maintain his composure. And something that we've, I think, always known was there and always kind of anticipated, but he's been able to keep his cool relatively in these debates. And last night, that certainly wasn't the case. And a couple of you have mentioned this, but I think, I was kind of struck by that handshake at the front end. I think it was a power move by Kamala Harris. She went 60, 70% across the stage. She went over, introduced herself, said, "I'm Kamala Harris. Nice to meet you. Let's have a good debate." I mean, from my perspective, power move, and that was planned. And I think it really caught him a little off guard right off the bat. So when we get to this, I want to get into a little bit. We've chatted a little bit about some concerns and criticisms about the moderators. So I want to chat about that a little bit. But before we get into that, I do want to hit on. I always love to look at the New York Times breakdown of the debates. This debate, Harris spoke for 37 minutes and 41 seconds. Trump spoke for about 6 minutes longer, for about 43 minutes. But what I thought was most interesting, of the 37 minutes Harris spoke, 17 of those were spent attacking. So almost just under 50%, 46% of her time was spent attacking Donald Trump. Donald Trump, of his 43 minutes, just about 13 minutes were spent attacking. So his was just under 30%. This is vastly different than other debates, in particular his recent debate against Joe Biden. And again, I think goes to so much of his time was spent trying to defend on the attacks that he was getting, rather than the potential attacks or points that he possibly had prepared in advance. So I thought that was really interesting that Harris's attacks were almost 50% and Trump's were just about 30. Of the issues, economy was the one that was talked about the most, just shy of 10 minutes. Abortion was about 8 minutes. And then the Russia-Ukraine war, democracy, immigration, and foreign policy all got about 6 minutes apiece. I think this was to be expected, kind of what we chatted in our preview of what we anticipated those issues to be of importance. But I want to chat about the moderators a little bit, because I do know that my personal perspective of it is I do believe there is a place for live fact checking and having some comments in response to what the candidates are saying. That's not something we saw in the first debate. And I think that this is something that we saw and I was interested in when I first saw it. I do believe it was more one-sided, though. Some numbers that I had seen: Trump was fact-checked 4 times, Kamala was not checked at all. Trump was pushed for follow-up 6 times, and Harris was not. Most notably to me, he was pushed on the abortion ban in multiple follow-ups, and she was not at all pushed in a follow-up on asking of if we were better off. So, Preya, I want to get your insight. I know you had some frustrations with the moderators. You mentioned that it was 3 against 1. Talk to me a little bit about it.
To your point, like, there is a time for fact checking and there is a time for allowing candidates to either run with their speeches, their positions, whatever you want to call it, right? Allowing them to run and either run wild and free and do a great job, or to, hang themselves, right? But it's not the moderator's job to sit there and pick winners and losers. And I think that's exactly what happened last night. To your point, they fact-checked Donald Trump multiple times. They did not do that with Kamala Harris, despite the fact that she lied on that debate stage. She lied about Charlottesville. She lied about fracking. She lied about Minnesota Freedom Fund. She's lied about many of those things. Where Donald Trump didn't answer questions, the moderator specifically went out of their way to follow up with him, to ask for follow-ups and demand answers from him. They did not do that with Kamala Harris when she lied about fracking and they asked her about it, when they asked her about her flip-flops on various issues, when they asked her about the economy and she completely dodged it, when they asked her about immigration and she did nothing to talk about how she was the border czar and did not own it. She did not talk about those things. They did nothing to talk about, to push back on her whatsoever. Meanwhile, they found every opportunity to fact check or push their, whatever facts on Donald Trump. They made sure to follow up on him. Even though, like, when you look at how the questions were asked, they asked Donald Trump about multiple issues that concerned him and his candidacy, like January 6th, like the lawsuits and everything else. And I'm not saying that those questions are not warranted. Absolutely not. That's not what I'm saying at all. But there was not the same level of, like, personal prodding in terms of the questions on Kamala's side. She had the one question about the flip-flops back and forth, but that was it. And they allowed her to like brush that off completely. And I think again, this is about perception. Like we can talk about reality all we want all day long, but the facts are simple. Like voters care about perception. The folks who are watching this debate want to know that their perceptions are being heard and addressed. And last night, what they saw is moderators, whether they were trying to be biased or not. I'm not in their like shoes. I am not going to sit there and like say, okay, they had an agenda one way or another. But the perception is that they had unfairly like targeted Donald Trump for fact checks and everything else because they deemed that he is going to lie. They allowed Kamala Harris to go scot-free. And in some ways, they gave Donald Trump an out because he could say, you know what, this debate was not fair. It was 3 against 1. I'm having to compete with 2 moderators and Kamala Harris. Like I'm having to, defend myself as I'm being ganged up on. It's an out if he doesn't want to do a second debate. It's an out if he never wants to do a debate with ABC again. It's an out if he wants to say, well, I would have won, except, I'm having to compete against 3 people instead of 1. I think ABC just did a very poor job of moderating and handling that debate. We talked about this right before we went live. That debate was supposed to end at 9:30 last night, Central Time. It did not. I mean, like, it got to the point where I'm texting with friends and being like, wasn't this supposed to be over already? I even tweeted about it. Is this not supposed to be over already? I think they were supposed to go to 2 commercial breaks. They only went to 1, I believe. They did not have a handle on the situation. It didn't seem like the mics, they said that the mics were muted. And I understand they're 6 feet apart. You're in a small space. Mics do pick up, reverb, acoustics, all that stuff. So it's easy to pick up, sound from other people nearby. But it didn't seem like the mics were muted either because you could hear them like butting in and out. I think ABC lost control very early on. The moderators did nothing to endear themselves to the audience or the candidates. They gave Donald Trump an out at the end of the night. And they really did moderate this in a way that kind of makes Donald Trump look like a victim at the end of the day because they did not handle things in a professional fashion. I think CNN did a much better job of handling the first debate.
I highly encourage those of you who are only listening to this on audio to come back and watch it on the live stream as well, because facial reactions during some of these responses all across the board, spot on. Will, are we just being whine
Yes.
crybaby
Yes.
Republicans
Yes.
over here?
Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
talk
This
to me
is
about
exactly
that.
what it is. I just want to say this is the equivalent of the New York Giants complaining about a holding call being the reason that they got their butts kicked by the Vikings last week. Yes, maybe a hold happened here or there, but that is not the problem. The problem is your team stinks and everyone involved in your team and roster building stinks. And you played a terrible game. A couple holding penalties here and there did not cause your entire franchise to be awful. It's the same with Donald Trump. He got fact checked a couple times. It's a lot easier to fact check a former president than it is someone who has not been the leader of a free world, right? I mean,
she's the vice president of the United States. Are you kidding me? She literally has a hand in this administration and the last 4 years of disaster that we have seen under this administration. She was a senator in the United States Senate for how many years? For over a decade. Do not tell me that she does not have a record. That is absolutely false. She ran for president in 2020. She's been on a debate stage before. She's been backtracked by her own party. Like, you cannot tell me that she has not been challenged before. The fact of the matter is that last night there was only one candidate on that debate stage that was fact-checked. It was Donald Trump. I am not saying that he didn't do a terrible job. I'm already on the record saying it was bad. But to sit here and tell me that she does not have a record, therefore she cannot be fact-checked or challenged is absolutely ridiculous. I am sorry.
Say she doesn't have a record and can't be fact-checked. I said it's a lot easier to do when you have a guy. We're talking about like January 6th.
She's been in office longer than he
January 6th.
She's been in office longer than he has.
So
she's been in office longer than he has. You cannot tell me that the former president
They're
of the United
asking
States
him about
is easier
January
to fact check
6th.
than somebody who has over a decade of experience.
It's a lot easier, actually. I mean, when you're talking about people rushing the Capitol and trying to kill people, and that is a much easier thing to fact check than it is a minor policy difference or
I'm
something
sorry, there's
about
literally
tracking
video of her saying in
little
2020 that
ideas.
there is literally video all over the place of her saying in 2020 that she would absolutely ban fracking. They did not, like, if you're going to fact check someone,
We've
I'm
talked
sorry,
about
if
this
you're going to
before.
ask,
Go ahead.
but here's the thing. If you are a news organization, you are a national news organization, and you are going to sit there and host a debate with two presidential candidates, two people who want to be the next leader of the free world, then you better have your ducks in a row. I am sorry. So if you're going to sit here and fact check live, you better have a fact check for every single answer and every single question that you are about to ask. That is just plain due diligence. The fact that they didn't do that is just straight up sloppy, and ABC should be ashamed of themselves.
I mentioned this last night that nothing tells us how that debate went more than the entire Republican Party griping about how the referees were calling the game. I mean, ultimately, it's going to be your fallback position when you get your butts kicked. That's what happens. And I will say this:
about the moderators all the time because they are
fact check every single thing he says his entire life. Everything he says is a lie. It's BS. But they could fact check him every single response he's ever given. I mean, the guy just doesn't tell the truth. It's literally how he built his career. You know what I mean?
We talked about this though in the last time we did this podcast, is that at the end of the day, reporters are more favorable to Democrats than they are Republicans. It is the easiest job in the world to be a comms director in the Democrat Party because you literally just have to pick up the phone and say, hey, I have a story, and they're like, tell me everything about it. I'll start writing it now. It'll be up in 2 hours. Whereas a Republican, you could have a legitimate story, and it is like trying to pull teeth just to get someone to even pick up a phone. Like, that's just the reality of it.
As a Dem research guy, I agree with you on the comms side of things. They take all of our good work and get credit for it. So that's a whole nother discussion. Donald Trump is the most fact-checkable human being. He is a walking fact-check target. That is his entire thing. So yes, maybe they should have like fact checked her on a couple little things. But again, that is not what changed this debate. He stinks. He has terrible ideas and he lies about everything. He makes stuff up off whole cloth. People are eating their neighbors' dogs. People are, you can go on and on with some of the BS.
I mean, there is a story out of Canton of a woman eating her cat. I'm just gonna say.
You're gonna defend that one, Preya. We'll come back to that.
I'm not gonna defend it. I'm not defending it by any stretch of the means.
Well,
no, I mean, I just don't maybe it was a little tilted towards her, I guess, but who cares? She still dominated him in every facet of that debate. I mean, he was awful, and he made stuff up. He kept changing the question into one response that he had written down, and he was angry. He was scowling. He was super jowly. He was hunched over, and he was pissed off. And it's because he did not have a good response to her. And yes, of course, people are always going to find a reason to excuse their candidate's terrible performance. And in this case, I kind of agree with you that the moderators, maybe they should have been a couple more calls on the other side, but it did not change anything ultimately. That's loser talk, in my opinion. I mean, that's like a Giants fan.
And
I'm not saying. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, this is kind of, Michael and I spoke a little bit last week. I was expressing my frustrations of no interviews or press conferences of Kamala Harris over the last 40-some days. And we kind of talked a little bit about this of, you have one side, Kamala doing this, and then you have the other side of Donald Trump giving you so much, right? That he does give you so much and says so much, that he has so much on the record. So to Will's point, there is so much to be able to fact check and less from Harris on that. And I think you can kind of weigh that of pros and cons for each of them. I think we can all agree that there were more times that Trump was maybe pushed on this than Harris was. I also agree that I don't think it changed the overall outcome of the debate here. And we'll get into some of those different fact checks here. But Michael, I want to hear from you on this.
Well, go ahead.
I just give one more quick follow-up. Sorry,
Yeah.
Michael.
No, go.
We need a moderator here. No, I'm joking. What I would say is I want to give you some credit, actually, Becky and Kia, because last time we were on, we talked about the mute button situation, and from my perspective, it was going to be a good thing for Donald Trump. You're right. I think it definitely helped Kamala a little more because, she was able to say stuff, and while it picked it up, we don't know what she was saying, but it obviously threw him off. And I don't know if you remember, a few times he stopped and he looked at her and he told her, "Be quiet" or something. I can't remember the
I'm
exact
talking
phrase.
now. You've heard that before.
Yeah, exactly. Which came off as like pretty misogynist. You know what
Really
I mean?
bad.
And so I'll give you two credit about that. I think you were absolutely right that helped her quite a bit. The having that mute button. Anyway, sorry, Michael. Go ahead.
No, what I would say is that the role of moderators is to moderate, and Donald Trump and Donald Trump's campaign signed up for rules, and now that doesn't bind them to the truth. But this wasn't an ambush interview. This wasn't Mike Wallace standing outside where he suddenly has to answer questions. Trump campaign signed up for these rules. The moderators were going to have a role, and I just have to say to you, I think that the statements that came out of Donald Trump's mouth were worthy of being fact checked. Were absolutely worthy of being fact checked, and they warranted being fact checked. We're talking about someone who has a very serious problem with the truth and with reality. This is someone who, in the last week or so, has taken as flip flop on abortion in a variety of ways. So it's reasonable for there to be fact checks, in particular when there's only going to be one debate. There is a possibility that this may be the only debate that occurs. And so I understand that it's frustrating for Republicans to watch their presidential candidate not stay on message and get fact checked. But the problem is that Donald Trump has a problem with the truth, and he has a problem staying on message. And I think the debate moderators, the bottom line is, did Kamala Harris, did the vice president misspeak to the same level as Donald Trump did during the debate? I would say absolutely not. And so if the job of the moderators is to fact check and give the correct information to the American people as they're watching this, I can't think of a worse position for their moderators to be in. And here's why I'll say that. You want to know why? I don't subscribe this to anyone on this podcast or any of you guests, but a lot of MAGA people have a real problem with the truth. And so when anyone from the reporter confronts them on their perspective and on a different reality, such as having a discussion on the 2020 election, and Donald Trump recoils the way that he does, and it's tough to nail down, that's the challenge. I can understand the frustration, but I view, as fairly as I can be, as I'm trying to be, is to say that the times that Donald Trump was fact checked, I thought they were reasonable fact checks that needed to be addressed. And because I do think it's important in elections, particularly when this may be the only debate, that voters get the same information. I guess I would ask back to Preya, and I guess I'd ask back to this group. What should be done when there is a candidate on stage, whether it's a Democrat or it's a Republican, who's agreed to a debate with moderators and they're consistently saying misinformation? Because I'll tell you, as someone who's been a journalist, done work as a journalist, it is not my job to just be a stenographer for what a candidate says. You do have a responsibility to push back. So I guess the question I'd say in the flip side is, what should be the role for moderators when there's a candidate who's lying to the level which they sometimes do, not specific to Trump?
I will say this. Look, I think CNN handled it well because they decided, you know what, we're just going to let people speak and let people make a choice. I think that was a good decision. They came off as fair. They handled their questions well. They did a good job on that front. I'm not saying that the fact checks aren't warranted. I'm not saying that the debate would have changed any differently whatsoever if they hadn't fact checked Donald Trump as much as they did. What I'm saying is that you, as a national news organization, a global news organization, has agreed to do a moderated debate between two people who are vying to be the next president of the United States, and you are only fact checking one. You are only you are for a majority of a part when it comes to personal questions. You have more of those guided personal questions to one side versus another. There is a view of perception that changes drastically, and it feeds into a narrative that the media is not fair and it is biased. And if you are going to have a live fact check in the middle of a debate where you are going to interrupt the candidate and tell them that they are false, you better have fact checks for both sides. And it's not hard. It all lives on social media now. You should have fact checks for both sides, and you better be prepared to push back on both candidates equally.
Yes,
Because
but
there
I
were a
don't.
number of issues where Kamala Harris either didn't answer the question, she sidestepped it, or flat out lied about it, and she went unchecked.
Yes,
And
and I would
that is
say to you
where
there.
the problem comes.
Yes, and I would say to
Where the
you, there
problem
is not anyone who's waking up today and is looking at last night's debate and saying that Donald Trump didn't lie or that Donald Trump's lies shouldn't have been fact checked. What I think is people are saying and are attempting to say is that the vice president should have been fact checked more. And I would argue to you, okay, but that doesn't mean that doesn't mean that we have to make up lies. It doesn't mean we have to come up with ridiculous things. There isn't a quota system at the beginning of the debate that says, okay, I'm going to fact check this candidate 10 times and this candidate has to be fact checked times. I would say to you, I understand the frustration. I think the frustration that has been voiced online has been 1/10 as thoughtful as this discussion and as 1/10 as substantive as what I'm hearing on this. But ultimately, I do think some of that responsibility lies with Donald Trump. I do think I honestly do. But I think as someone who, and Preya, I will say to everyone on this, I know to all of us have been involved in debate prep in some way. And so when this group raises a criticism on a debate format, I'm certainly going to take it to heart and listen to it because I think there is some criticism to it.
I do want to take this and move us into chatting about some of these issues and key moments. Some of the moments Sure, go for it, Will.
That was my impersonation of them last night. But I would just say, when you are asked a question about overturning Roe v. Wade or January 6th, and you don't give a legit answer that everybody on the planet knows the answer to, and you are flat out denying it or lying about it, that is not on the moderators for fact checking it. That is just a simple, easy thing to do. They should not be blamed for that. Those are layups that he cannot take because he cannot tell the truth.
Again, the question asked by Becky isn't about whether the fact checks were fair. It's about how the moderators handled themselves and what the perception is coming out of it. And the reality is that the perception is that the moderators were one-sided in the way that they handled Donald Trump. And if you want to avoid this going forward, and look, I tell you this as somebody who's been in the communications world for a decade, which blows my mind to this day that I've been doing this for 10 years and I haven't left screaming. But as somebody who's been doing this for 10 years, who has been building relationships with reporters here in Minnesota, across the country, nationally, I want to help reporters get the story that they're looking for. I want to make Republican voices more welcoming to them. I want to get rid of this fake news thing. I'm not a normal comms director. I like reporters and I like working with them and I like helping them access the truth on our side as well so the story can be balanced and tell both stories. But at the same time, when you have examples like last night, it makes my job that much harder. It makes my job as a communications person, as a strategist, to tell my clients that they should trust me when I say trust the media, because they'll go back to this point in time and they'll say, hey, look what they did to Donald Trump last night. They might not agree with him. They might not say that the fact checks are bogus or unfair. They might not say that it's not warranted, but they might just say, hey, they weren't fair to Donald Trump compared to how they treated some of the things that Kamala Harris said. And that makes the job that much harder. It makes our ability to do our job from a Republican standpoint that much more difficult. They did themselves a disservice. They did the entire industry a disservice last night from a political perspective. And they made the job of comms directors and people who actually want to help the media and try to bring some balance back to coverage. They did a disservice to that.
I want to keep us on track here. I think we can agree to disagree on how we feel about the moderators last night. But one thing, I think that we can certainly look at, and Preya, I think one thing you and I probably can agree on with our work with Republicans, and especially both tangentially or for the, supporting the Trump campaign in some capacity, is the issues that there is with Donald Trump staying on message, right? We know that there are a lot of really good policy stances that Republicans can and should stand on right now. And we didn't see a lot of that from Donald Trump last night. We see a lot of the distractions. With Kamala Harris, a lot of the criticism about her has been that we don't know a lot of her policy stances because she has either flip-flopped, she's changed her stances, but not her values, however you want to look at it. We are just 56 days out from the election right now. In a recent New York Times Siena poll, 28% of voters prior to the debate said that they needed to learn more about Harris, and only 9% said that about Trump. I do think that following this debate, that number has shrunk for Harris. I do believe that we did hear a little bit more from Harris for some voters to feel that they know a little bit more where she stands. Unfortunately, I think from Donald Trump, we did see him take that bait and go into those tangents and go into the distractions that take us off from the economy, from the prices and that we're not better off, from the crime, from the immigration stances. We saw it time and time again. So I want to get into some of these key moments, some of the seized opportunities or missed opportunities that the candidates took. And I want to start with this because I feel like we need to we don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but we got to spend some time on it. Let's just start with, you can find anything on the internet. You can find wild and crazy stories on the internet on every topic, every issue, covering anything that whether it follows or goes against your policy stances or that of your opponent. It is up to candidates of whether they give some time and space to that. I have worked for candidates who have certainly heard one story and want to run with that and have spent many, many times, minutes, hours, begging them to not say that on the campaign trail, sometimes successfully, sometimes not successfully. We saw this with Scott Jensen in the litter boxes. We have Tampon Tim. But last night it was eating cats and dogs. It was migrants in Ohio. There was one story where one guy said that they lost a cat or dog and it was eaten by migrants. Preya, you led into this a little bit. Do you think this is something that was worthy of any iota of time from Donald Trump on the stage last night, and that he took it when there are so many better things to hit Kamala Harris on when it comes to immigration?
I think it's laughable to how far the hyperbole is gone. I don't think that migrants are eating cats or dogs. At least somebody correct me if I'm wrong and I've seen something else. I know there is a story out of Ohio right now that a woman in Canton did in fact eat a cat.
Oh, come on.
And that was a video. That was a video that folks were showing. She was not Haitian. Like, we're gonna dispel that right away. Nobody as of yet has talked about like migrants eating cats or dogs. Do I believe the geese and duck story? Absolutely. And why do I do that? Why do I believe that? Because I'm the daughter of immigrants, for goodness sakes. I mean, like, we've all joked about that before in my family during holidays. So, like, would somebody very new to the country maybe do that? I would say that, like, I would kind of believe it, but that's just from my own personal experience. I'm not saying that it actually is happening. I think it's a funny anecdote if you want to make a larger case to what's going on. I think there was something much closer to home that Donald Trump could have hit when he's talking about the immigration problem that we're facing right now. You could talk about the Chinese fentanyl that's coming into our country from across the border. You could talk about the fact that just last week, an illegal immigrant who was arrested multiple times here in Minneapolis, crossed the border into Wisconsin, went to Prairie du Chien and raped a mother and daughter and assaulted them, and is a Venezuelan transnational gang member. And they got through the border. These are stories that you could talk about and blame Kamala Harris and Tim Walz for, frankly. And they chose not to do that. They chose not to talk about the issues in when it comes to immigration. What is a very good issue for Donald Trump? He did not hit it out of the park the way that he needed to.
Will, I want to ask you, what do you think was maybe a missed opportunity of Kamala Harris? Anything that stands out where she didn't answer to something that you were sitting back that was a knockout of the park, or on the contrast, anything that you really thought she crushed it? We're sitting there applauding in your living room.
I mean, well, first of all, I would say, who amongst us hasn't wanted to take and nibble out of our neighbor's yappy corgi, right? I mean, we've all been there once or twice. But no, I thought she did. I just she covered the stuff that I had expected her to cover. I would have liked to see more of maybe some of the economic stuff fleshed out a little bit. I'm not surprised that it wasn't, quite frankly. I think talking a little bit more about issues that are, frankly, I thought talked a little bit too much about how much she loves tracking now. You know what I mean? Like I don't want to. I don't want to hear that stuff. Like that's not winning me over by any
Pennsylvania's
means.
really important, Will.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I guess. Yeah. I mean, I have a lot to say about that. But that was something that didn't really appeal to me that much. And there were a couple of pieces like that, but I think we got exactly what I expected last night.
Michael, any standout moments for you?
Yeah, I think there was a lack of message discipline by Trump that was it was magnificent in how out of line it was. It was astounding, and it was and there were some pretty significant pushback by a number of conservative commentators on his performance last night. And let me say this: Republicans have a problem with this. It's not Trump isn't the first one. We've seen examples of it in Minnesota, where we have candidates they're seeing things online. They don't have the proper staff around them, and it's ending up coming out of their mouth at events, local events, or on stage. And Donald Trump said things last night that have no basis in reality and frustrated a number of conservatives that are supporting him online. Eric Erickson tweeted this week. He said, "This last week and now this debate have sort of ratified in my mind that the Republican Party has become more interested in winning the Twitter war than the election. They've confused what happens here for the real world, just as Democrats once did." He also then railed against the online people who filled Twitter with these ridiculous racist memes about this cat stuff that's been going on. And you know who's also to blame for this? JD Vance, for what he did on this. And so I understand the frustration, but where this comes from is whether it's at the local level with candidates, whether it's at the state level, or whether it's clearly now with presidential candidates, there has to be message discipline. And Republican candidates have to stop reading crap that's online and then just blurting it out on the debate stage. Because as Eric Erickson was out there screaming, Trump just changed the narrative of what this debate could be because of his sloppy, undisciplined messaging. And again, I don't know who's to blame for it. I know who was touting the fact that they were helping with the debate, but I don't want to tag anyone directly. But when your vice presidential candidate's pushing it and Laura Loomer's on the plane, you're not working with a real good base of reality that needs to happen. And so I understand the frustration. But once Trump's gone from the stage, independent of what happens this election cycle, Republicans have to start taking the fact of Eric's message very seriously, which is let's live in the real world, and Twitter isn't real world sometimes.
It's owning the libs ideology is honestly like it's a funny thing to say, but it's also true. It is like the main core of what the Republican Party stands for these days is owning the libs and getting a one over on Twitter with the base that just retweets you all the time we know a couple of people locally here that are part of that crew, but like that is the main thing to do, and that is not going to win elections. That's a very short-sighted and weird and online thing that most people don't care about.
I will say, to Michael's point, like I do know some of the people that do communications around Donald Trump. They are very smart. And I know they definitely would not have fed into the stuff that's coming out of Ohio right now. They would have much rather pushed on to like the stuff that's going on in Wisconsin that I just mentioned. But I think the problem to your point, is that we have conservatives that have stopped listening to folks like Eric Erickson, and they're now feeding off of folks like, like talking about, the Laura Loomers of the world, or Alex Jones, or even Royce White, right? Like, I'm just gonna call it out for what it is, right? Is like, these are the people that we're listening to, and we're not trusting and verifying like Ronald Reagan told us to do, right? Like, are just looking at what's online, and we're taking random weird accounts and treating them as gospel. And we need to get back to the principle of what our message is, because you are absolutely right. We have lost the messaging war here, and if we do not fix it and fix it quick, we will have a big problem for decades to come. But I will also just say, to Will's point, we can talk about owning the libs like all you want, but like, if we're not going to also say that the Republicans are weird thing, like, doesn't kind of match the same energy, like, we shouldn't be like throwing stones at glass houses.
There's a Twitter account. A guy named Cat Turd is an intellectual thought leader on the Republican Party at this point. So let's just. I think weirdness is very fair.
All I will say is, I will just make a plea. If there are any candidates or future candidates, listen, two things can be true at the same time. That doesn't need to mean that both of them should be said out loud. And I think we need to focus on the things that move the needle, the things that impact voters and families and business owners. And that's my biggest frustration here with Donald Trump, is that we don't get that. While we all on this call, I think, know that there are substantial things that any Republican running for president right now could stand on, could hit Kamala Harris on, and could hit Democrats in general on, and it was missed. Two things that I want to hit on here before we move on is first out, I think Kamala Harris knocked it out of the park when it came to abortion. I thought she did a really good job.
Yes.
Obviously, we don't need to get into the Donald Trump and his West Virginia mix up about Governor Northam and all of that kind of thing. That's a story for another day. But I do want to say, again, this goes to what Michael and I were chatting about last week, where I think Democrats are really moving the needle on this, is the stories that they are telling. And she talked about the woman who is miscarrying and being denied care. She talked about the incest survivor that is being denied care. And these are the stories that I think are impactful, and I think it hits home. And she looked at Donald Trump when she was saying all of them. I thought it was a really compelling situation. And I thought Trump just obviously botched his response. And then the other one that I was really frustrated about, I thought that one of the most practice rehearsed situations that Donald Trump could go into this debate being ready for is trying to calm and dispel the thought that he is a threat to democracy. He was asked about January 6th, and he bungled it so bad. He pivoted to criminals crossing the border, comparing it to criminals crossing the border, and they are the ones that should be prosecuted. Blame Nancy Pelosi and Mayor Bowser. The split screen on this, again, it was a compelling moment. Harris and her visuals on this. She then took the opportunity to say something to the effect, I'm paraphrasing, but if January 6th was a bridge too far for you, we welcome you Republicans on our side. I thought it was an opportunity that Donald Trump could go in and say, listen, they are saying I'm a threat to democracy. This happened. We're moving on. I'm going to make sure, he could have come in with the most rehearsed way of saying, I am not a threat to democracy. I am going to be X, Y, and Z. We are the party of the Constitution. I thought that was something he should have and could have done and did not. And I was really, really disappointed by his response on that. Will, you're nodding along.
Yeah. You're 100% right. And this is one of the big things I wanted to talk about. You're 100% right about everything you said. I want to add that instead of reassuring the American people that he is not a threat to democracy, what he did instead was quote and promote a guy named Viktor Orban, who's the leader in Hungary. Now, you look at Viktor Orban, what he has done in Hungary since the 90s. He is the living embodiment of what scares people about Project 2025. He has built the entire government and how it functions around him and his friends and his personality. He has completely gutted the judiciary. It's not independent anymore. The press has no freedoms whatsoever. The laws are built around his personal wants and needs. It's a kleptocracy. All the money is coming into him, and he decides where it goes out, and it's always his friends and his kids' houses and all this stuff. This is the stuff that scares people the most, and why Project 2025 has become such an issue. And all Donald Trump did was tell people how great a guy who's done it in his country is, and what a great job he's doing.
Correct. I will also say, as someone who is one of the reasons I'm supporting Harrison Walz is because of Trump on that exact issue. Republicans I spoke with last night, who are classified as undecided, they were very concerned about Trump's answer on that, because he is continuing to inject misinformation into not only this upcoming election cycle, but it's what he's done in the past. It's a problem. It's an ongoing cancer for Republicans, and it's got to be resolved, because my concern is what's going to happen in a few weeks when balloting starts, when voting starts. We are facing some serious issues because Donald Trump is doing nothing whatsoever to calm the fears of people about voting. And we have United States Senate candidates like Royce White going out there and fanning the flames and demanding that they should have get to guard ballots and other types of. This is a powder keg ready to go, and Donald Trump could have done a lot of things to show that he's embraced reality, and he didn't do it last night. He gassed it once again.
Well, I'll just say this is like, I think at the end of the day, like anyone who like came away from that debate thinking Kamala was genuine in anything, whether it's, you know, welcoming Republicans onto the side or not, like I don't buy it at the end of the day. I
Bullshit.
think that she is the most liberal like senator, and I know the media tried to do some cleanup for her once she became like the candidate, but she is one of the most liberal senators to ever to sit in the United States Senate. She had some of the most extreme policies furthest to the left when she ran for 2020, and we have to take her word for it then, not what it is right now. But I will say, and I've said this before, when it comes to the Royce White situation, right? And because this is a top-down issue at the end of the day. Republicans have a problem with messaging. We are so focused on the past. And this is specifically to Donald Trump. He's so focused on defending himself to make his image look good, to put himself in the best light, that we are losing the messaging war when it comes to the actual issues where Republicans win by 5, 10, 15 points handedly, because we were too busy talking about the past, we were too busy talking about the conspiracies, and we were too busy talking about things that have nothing to do with why voters are going to the ballot box at the end of the day. And that is the ultimate problem.
Yep. And I will say, as someone who has been meeting with Republicans in this state and talking with others, Republicans who feel isolated from the party, who feel politically homeless, Kamala Harris landed the plane last night. She is authentic on these issues, and they believe her. They believe her that she's going to defend the Constitution, she's going to defend the rule of law, and she's going to be an advocate for democracy, win, lose, or draw. And that's something that Republicans can't have right. Yeah.
I do want to say, obviously, the flash polls do reflect that as well, that last night there is a lot of thought in that. Now, I, again, consider myself undecided in the middle. I did think her statement there was authentic. I'm not ready to come over to that side yet, but I did think it was a great line of welcoming folks over, and I do think that that is a bridge that is an issue for a lot of people, myself included, obviously Michael as well. Real quick, I want to give some numbers from that CNN flash poll. Debate watchers gave Trump a 23-point advantage when it comes to immigration, a 6-point advantage when it comes to handling the role of commander-in-chief, which was a little surprising to me. They did give Harris a 9-point advantage when it comes to protecting democracy, and a 21-point advantage on whom they trusted to handle the issue of abortion. Again, we're going to be coming back to that abortion topic quite a bit, because it is, I think, a really big decision point for a lot of folks. But we have a brief 10, 15 minutes left here. I want to get into some end post debate things. Debate finished. Governor Walz was on a live interview with Rachel Maddow when the news broke that the one and only Taylor Swift endorsed Harris Walz. I think this is something we speculated would come. We talked about it during the convention. I got to give her some credit. She signed her endorsement with love and hope. Taylor Swift, childless cat lady. Will, Michael, nice job. Thoughts on getting T Swift on your side?
I mean, I thought she was supposed to do it with Travis Kelce at the halftime of the Super Bowl last cycle. Remember that whole conspiracy?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, good. I like her reasoning for it. The AI thing had her endorsing Trump, and she's concerned about that. So get it out of the way. I mean, awesome. I think it's great. I don't really have much more thoughts on it than that. I think it certainly helps. The the Harris Walls ticket is extremely popular with young people right now, and I don't think this hurts that.
I think it is. Go ahead.
No, you.
I thought it was fantastic. It's, as Will has said, this is a ticket that is really connecting with younger voters, and this is I think potentially the best, if not the best, ambassador in which to do that. I just want to point out to you something, that right now, Michael Brodkorb, Dick Cheney, Taylor Swift, and Kamala Harris are all on the same side. That's
Wild.
that's a pretty big universe, and that's I would
And
have
Luke
never
Skywalker.
and Luke Skywalker and Tim Walz, and it's just astounding. And Liz Cheney, former congresswoman, and so that's a legitimate coalition, and that's what's needed to win. And boy, oh boy, it was great to see. And I'm just going to say this to you. I think the former president is making a mistake if he picks a fight with Swifties, but we'll see.
Yeah.
Michael, you're the Taylor Swift of Minnesota.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Now we have seen the Harris camp have already pitched a second debate. They obviously love how they have done. Trump hasn't quite responded. Preya, what's your take? Do you think we're going to get a second debate?
I think Trump's advisors will probably say no to a second debate. I think Trump will feel compelled to do a second debate, to right the proverbial ship of perception that he did not do well. I think that's probably how that's playing out right now.
Moderated by Don Jr., right?
I think it'll probably end up going back to like a CNN or a Fox News, because I think Kamala will want to debate him again. And like, if
Liz Collins.
I think that if Trump is like, hey, let's do Fox News, and she says no, then the whole point of let's do a second debate kind of seems pointless. If she really is fearless as Michael and Will think she is, like, she'll have no problem showing up on a Fox News debate stage. But going back to the Taylor Swift thing for just a quick second, I think it's kind of laughable that like folks are so surprised that Taylor Swift chose Kamala Harris. I mean, the woman's literally made an entire career off of singing about what bad partners she chooses in life. So, I mean, the fact that she chose Kamala Harris.
You went there. You went there.
I say that as a Taylor Swift fan. I say that as a Taylor Swift fan. Both can be at the same time.
Preya,
what a line!
That was a good one. I appreciate it.
That is absolutely your best work, and my God, I am so concerned about your safety right now, because the Swifties are going to come for you. Holy buckets! The air just left through. I am so proud of you. My goodness gracious! And Becky, we got that live on video.
It was good.
Holy moly,
it was good. There's the reason she gets paid the big bucks, ladies and gents.
I'm impressed.
Wow. I'm gonna lick in my wounds the rest of the day here. Let's got my ass kicked.
Before we close, I just want to see if there's any last response here. Any last thoughts? Obviously, we've been talking a lot about the Harris Walls momentum, post Biden dropping out, post convention, now post debate. What can we expect? Are we going to get a sit down from Kamala Harris? What's next, and what do you guys expect to see in the coming days or weeks? Michael, let's go with you.
I think I would expect the Harris Walls campaign to stay the course. I think maybe some more broader discussions on some policy items, more campaign events, more type of rallies and stuff. I would hope that there's a second debate. I don't know. I absolutely believe that the Harris campaign went out and asked for a second debate. I think that they have to feel very confident with how the vice president can perform, and so I think the issue is going to be on Trump. But I think steady as she goes, the campaign can continue to move forward, and I think I think they're in a good spot. I think they're acting like they're 3 points down. There should be, if history is a good indicator, there should be a good bump of a couple points, which is significant in this race. What I'm telling people, every person that asks me this race, everyone gets the same answer. It's a flip of a coin, and it's going to be a flip of a coin until election day.
Will, final thoughts?
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I agree with Michael on, more campaign events, more of those things, but I am more focused on what the nuts and bolts of their campaigns are doing. And I think it's undeniable if you just look here in Minnesota, for example, and across the country. I think we're all hearing some of the same stuff. The Trump ground game is virtually non-existent. They are giving out like hats, and like they're giving out like you go like Disney World, you go to the front of the line for a ride for a Trump rally in the future, like that's the kind of stuff they're doing. They're basically trying to bribe people to go out and knock doors because they do not have any sort of a operation running anywhere. I mean, they have some field offices, but there were Minnesota GOP field offices anyway, like or run by the local BPOUs. It's virtually non-existent right now, and I to me that is the bigger story than Kamala having a sit down or like what's kind of going on at the top of the ticket. It's what's happening in these states, and I think Harris Walls are absolutely mopping the floor with them there.
Preya, final thoughts before we wrap.
I do, to Will's point, I do think that the map has changed for the Trump campaign since Kamala became the candidate. I do think that their focus has, I know that they like to say it's a fake news, but the Axios report I think is spot on. They are refocusing on how they look at Virginia and Minnesota and New Hampshire. I think that they are having to focus and spend more time in Wisconsin. I mean, they've been pretty much there every single week since Kamala became the candidate, whether it's JD or Donald Trump. They're going to these states more often. I do think that this is going to end up being a blip on the radar. Just depending on how many people actually watched the debate last night. As we all know, 2 months in a political campaign is a very long time. And things can happen very quickly and things can change in a flash. I do think that if Kamala doesn't begin sitting down with reporters, if they're not starting to talk about the issues, it will create a bigger window and a bigger opportunity for the Trump campaign to define them before they define themselves. And that could ultimately be the catalyst on how those swing voters do end up making a decision on how they vote.
It also gives the Trump campaign a lot of opportunity to find themselves on missing cats and dogs that are going on right now.
I did want to just hit on that. I just pulled it up as you were talking, Preya. They showed just shy of 58 million viewers last night, which is 6.5 million more that watched the June 27th debate between Trump and Biden. So it is significant. I don't know that it necessarily translates into actual move on the scale. I'm sure that we'll see polls come out real soon. Oh, you're shaking your head. You disagree. You think this is going to be a good bump?
Oh, you could see that? Yes. Yes.
I don't know. You held your disdain for my statement so well. Well, time will tell. Let's chat next week when we get a new poll that's coming out, because I'm sure they're in the field today. We will chat more about that soon. But before we wrap, we have a couple non-debate topics I want to get to.
I think we're short on time.
We have one. We had the first week of football. It was a really great week. I have to pat myself on the back because I am currently tied for first and beating Michael Brodkorb in our Pick'ems League. I have to pat myself on the back because, let's be real, who knows how long that's going to last. But for this week and at this point in time, I'm winning. So I'll take it. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then the last thing I want to say is just a reminder, the MinnPost Festival is on Saturday, September 28th. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will be doing a live in-person podcast with former Senator Michelle Benson and John Rouleau from the Minnesota Jobs Coalition. We have a great promo code. If you go to MinnPost Festival, minnpost.com/festival and use the code Breakdown, one word. You can get passes for the day for $30. It's a 40% discount. Again, this is access for the full day. There is a great slate of speakers. Obviously, we would like you to come see us. Our show is going to be titled Turning the Tide, Reviving the Republican Vision in Minnesota. So come check it out. Great day. We hope to see you there. Again, it's minpost.com/festival, promo code breakdown.
I guess Preya and I's interview or invitation got lost in the mail to that, huh?
Will, when
What's
we
happened?
talked about having a topic of reviving the Republican vision in Minnesota, you were top of our list. You just fell down a little bit.
I would be good at that, by the way. I would be very. I know a lot about that stuff.
Yeah, I'm a Republican for Harris Politics. I'm just lucky I'm the namesake. I'm lucky I'm a namesake with Becky, or I would have gotten dumped too. Guys, I want to just say before we close here, just before I end the show here, you guys were fantastic today. You guys threw the heat. We had more viewers today than ever before, and you guys are just A's at your game. And I got to say, you guys really brought it today. And so a tip of the cap to you guys for just doing a fantastic job and smiling while doing it. This needs to happen more. And all of you guys are pros, but Preya and Will, you guys really threw it, and we'll talk about it we'll talk about it. You guys just did a fantastic job. So thank you for being such good sports, and we hope you come back.
Of course.
We
tell us when round 3 is.
That's great. Exactly.
Yeah.
We want to thank you all for listening to the Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts or the platform where you listen. You can also leave us a review or check us out on all social media platforms at BB BreakPod. The Breakdown with Brodkorb and Becky will return next week. Thank you so much.
Bye.